Good afternoon. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News, coming to you from our digital desk. We have some breaking news. We expected a name to surface today. In fact, by law, it had to surface to see who was going to fill the now Vice President-elect J.D. Vance's Senate seat. Obviously, the senator from Ohio, he served 2 years in a 6-year term, but after being elected to the vice presidency, in fact, he had to resign his Senate seat last week ahead of the inauguration. CBS News now reporting that it is Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted who is going to be appointed, or at least announced, by the governor later today. He's expected to hold media availability at 1 o'clock. Sort of a cryptic email came out. We knew that a name had to surface. We didn't know what name it was going to be. Of course, Husted was on the short list along with several others, but it is now being leaked out, I guess, or at least reported by the national media, and so we're going to jump on that. CBS, our parent company, as that Jon Husted will fill that seat. I'm going to bring in my colleague, Jeff Slauson. Jeff, we've been covering this. We've been waiting for this announcement to talk about maybe some of the other candidates that were up for this on a short list.
Yeah, going through my notes actually from Election Day itself, when you and I were talking about this pretty heavily, what happens if Vance does become vice president. Ultimately, that did happen. Matt Dolan, Jane Timken, Vivek Ramaswamy, all of them listed as potential candidates, with Vivek actually kind of gaining an advantage over the last couple of weeks here. There was a reported meeting between the governor and Vivek, very much so a strong proponent of President Donald Trump. Now, there was a meeting between Jon Husted, the governor, and the soon-to-be President Trump a couple of weeks ago, actually at Mar-a-Lago. Seems that actually did go well here. Husted was rumored to be a front-runner for the past couple of weeks. We're going to talk about, obviously, in this, Dan, the timeline on this and potentially the amount of times that Husted needs to run to fulfill the remainder of this term in it. But regardless, the naming of Husted is something that isn't necessarily surprising. Again, there was some momentum that was making its way over the last couple of days that potentially Vivek Ramaswamy, who shockingly for some people that they don't really realize this, was born in Ohio, does own a residence, in the Columbus area, so would have qualified for the seat, but ultimately the name, while Husted was brought up in this, Dan, this is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit as far as who succeeds Governor DeWine when he steps down from his seat, can't run again in 2026. Husted obviously was going to be somebody that potentially could have been considered in this. That's now not going to happen. He's got to run potentially 2 more times for a full-time Senate seat, so that opens up a whole can of worms for that as well.
I just had an interview earlier this week with Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. Before the interview even started, I asked if his name was maybe still in the consideration for the Senate seat, and he said he wasn't aware that it ever was. And in fact, he told me that if it was offered to him, he would turn it down. He said when he's done with this term as Ohio Attorney General, he will either be going into the private sector or to the Ohio governor's office. So there are now a line of people who are going to run for the Ohio governor's position. It looked like that would be just kind of a handed down position to Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted, and that it might be a pretty easy run for him. The state has gone red pretty severely the last 8 years or so. We saw that with the J.D. Vance election when he beat the Democrat incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown. That was sort of the last Democrat stronghold position in the state of Ohio, at least when it comes to a statewide elected position. That was the lone Democrat holdout, was Sherrod Brown. So this is going to be interesting now to see this race. The current Ohio governor can run, his term runs out at the end of 2027. We will have a new governor in 2028. So start your engines to all those other Republicans. Frank LaRose comes to mind. He's probably going to take a shot at it. Frank LaRose is our current Ohio Secretary of State. He is following the exact Jon Husted playbook. Jon Husted was Secretary of State. He started to run for governor. I was here for that. It was going to be DeWine versus Husted. Those were the two front runners, and instead of running against each other, they teamed up. And DeWine was the governor in the governor position, and Husted for lieutenant governor. The Ramaswamy, it was interesting. He took his name out of the running for this position 2 months ago. Then he met with DeWine at the governor's mansion last weekend to discuss. And who knows? We're not saying that he was at the mansion hoping for the seat. Maybe he was helping DeWine as a representative of President-elect Trump, helping DeWine decide who should get that position.
I do want to point out, related to Vivek here, basically as soon as Vance won, he had put his name into the ring almost immediately. He was doing media availability, essentially promoting the potential Trump campaign or the Trump presidency, and said he would want to be considered and would accept any conversation related to it. And many people were surprised by that, but you and I talked about this, Dan. He is a resident of Ohio, or at least owns a property in Ohio, so he would be considered for it. And at some point, it seems at least there were some discussions made. Obviously here, with the decision made to go with Husted over Vivek or any other candidate, this is somebody that is an Ohio politician through and through. The one thing that we heard, we spoke with Bernie Moreno. I think I spoke with him pretty immediately following his win. I think it was a day or 2 days later. I asked what he's looking for in a partner. We'll find that sounded a little bit here, but he essentially said he wants someone that is from Ohio, for Ohio, will support Ohio, but also will be able to work with him very well. So you would have to assume that the decision from Governor DeWine potentially took into account what President Trump wants, but also what Bernie Moreno wants in a running mate here, and somebody that he can work with, being the two senators from Ohio. And again, he wanted somebody that he could also have his offices be close with. Bernie Moreno's office is going to be potentially, or most likely, in the area of the Columbus area, where John Husted very much so is. So clearly the decision was made here that they wanted somebody that represented the state. And as per what Bernie Moreno said, Senator Moreno said, he wanted somebody that he can work with, but very clearly he wanted somebody that was from Ohio and based in Ohio and clearly understands Ohio. He said that multiple times in our interview, and this is very much of the choice. I also want to get into, Dan, the timeline on this. So the J.D. Vance seat was supposed to expire in 2028. 2024-5 is the election year that we are currently in. So essentially what's going to happen is, as per Ohio law, DeWine appoints the successor for the seat. He fills it for 2 years before a special election, around 2 years, in 2026. That special election would then determine the rest of the fill-in seat for it. That person who is named, we believe it is John Husted, we know it's John Husted based off of our sources here from CBS News, will then be the incumbent when it comes to the special election. If he were to win that special election, would then be the incumbent again and would be able to be eligible for a full 6-year seat. So essentially for right now, he will be filling in for Vance for 2 years. Then it would become his quote-unquote full-time seat if he were to win that special election for another 2 years. Then it would officially be his after that.
And that's a rough road, let's be honest. Normally a senator is a 6-year term, so you only have to be elected, you only have to fundraise once every 5 years or so for that 6th year. But here's Husted. Boy, that's a daunting task. You are going to face 2 elections if you want this to become your permanent seat.
And also, not only just a regular election, it's a special election. And we have a professor that we talked to quite heavily on a lot of topics related to this. And he stressed that that doesn't mean that that special election needs to coincide with the November election. So you're basically campaigning off season, essentially. That makes it infinitely harder as well.
And it will pose a challenge then to whoever is going to, whatever Democrat is going to stand up and try and challenge John Husted in that special election. So we'll have to keep an eye on when that is announced, when that special election will be. That'll be in 2026 would be the term that he'll have to hold the special election. Just to reset here, CBS News reporting, as well as many other national networks, that it will be Lieutenant John Husted who will fill Vice President-elect J.D. Vance's Senate seat. As we've been discussing, this will be a 2-year position before he has to run in a special election to fill the last 2 years of the Vance seat. And then it'll be up in 2028 for a run at a 6-year term. This seems to pave the way for Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted, who has been a rising star over the last 10 to 12 years within the Ohio Republican Party. He has quote unquote paid his dues. He served as Secretary of State before running with Mike DeWine for the Ohio governorship. Think about everything that Lieutenant Governor and the governor have been through in the last 6 years. They came into office shortly thereafter. You get reelected, then you get hit with COVID. You have to go through all that. Look at some of the gains for Husted and DeWine. That Intel microchip plant that's being built in Licking County, which is very close to Columbus, that is a major, major win. And we know that that was something that Governor DeWine basically put in the lap of Jon Husted. Jon Husted has been a monster in the realm of economic development, bringing in big companies. Look at yesterday's announcement. Just yesterday, a defense military grade weapons company announced that they are going to build a $1 billion manufacturing plant, again, on the east side of Columbus. That is going to be a record number of jobs if and when it's completed, looking at 4,000 new jobs for the state of Ohio. That, again, was a California company that was probably being courted by just about every state in the country to build this brand new facility, state-of-the-art facility, and that would have been really Jon Husted's wheelhouse, to go out there, to sell it, to pitch it, come to Ohio, build this campus, which is going to eventually house 4,000 employees. So Jon Husted has a number of major wins under his belt. I'm going to bring Jeff Slauson back in. Jeff, anything else you're seeing as you're researching as we're live here?
Yeah, I wanted to provide some clarification on the time frame that we're going to look at as well. So Governor DeWine is actually going to be done in 2026. So the new governor would take place in 2027. So this makes it even more interesting, Dan, because that would mean that we would see two full-on elections basically in that year, where we'd have the special election in 2026, and then we'd have DeWine's replacement for governor in that year as well. And again, it would be different. So when we were talking about that special election, some Republicans would have to choose if they want to try and take on 2 years of a Senate term to replace Husted, or the full governor's attempt there and try and go for a full 8-year term there. I mean, that's where this could become a little tricky, right? And this is where this could become very interesting. You're somebody who's covered Ohio politics for a long time. That could be a very split party, or just nobody running against Husted in that special election, because again,
right,
you're only filling in 2 years of a seat when you could be facing a far more significant position for the governor's job.
Yeah, and we do expect to hear from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine at 1 o'clock today. He's holding what they simply called media availability. They didn't send out a press release and say, hey, the governor is going to announce who's going to fill the Vance seat at 1 o'clock. They simply said, if you'd like to come to the governor's office at 1 o'clock, he will have media availability.
Very unusual.
I've never seen a press release come out of the Ohio governor's office that just simply says, oh, the governor's going to have some time at 1 o'clock if you're around, if you want to stop in and ask him some questions. That just doesn't happen. He never holds just office hours, quote unquote. What I hope gets asked, and I'm going to, we have Brittany Weir and crew are on the way, and I will get in her ear and encourage her to ask, after we hear all of this, who will DeWine, and I'm sure he's going to say it's too early for that, who will DeWine now support or endorse for the governor's position when that seat is up as well? I guarantee he won't answer it, but you have to ask it. You know, this was looking like Jon Husted's job. He was going to be the heir apparent. There probably would not have been a challenger within the Republican Party. Maybe Dave Yost would have challenged him. But it'll be interesting now to see what happens.
Dan, we just have in there, I believe, sound from Senator Moreno on who he was looking for, the potential of what he wanted for that candidate to replace Vance in the seat. I don't know if we want to hear from that now.
Yep, here we go right here. Take a listen.
My partner in Washington, D.C., we want to be able to work together from little things like where our office locations are. We should work together to make sure we have offices around the entirety of the state of Ohio where we can share resources and then also constituent services.
Yeah, that was shortly after the election. Bernie Moreno is our other U.S. Senator. They're both Republicans. And as Republicans, they can partner up, team up. They can probably get a lot done for the state of Ohio. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I remember when speaking with Moreno, I asked him a couple of times related to that because you want some more general or less general ideas and more specifics on exactly what he's looking for. But yeah, I mean, essentially he wants somebody that just knows Ohio and that he can work with on this. Husted is somebody that very much so has been ingrained in Ohio politics, as you mentioned, Dan. So he's kind of not the anti-Moreno, but at least in the path, very, very different than Moreno in that aspect. Moreno very much so from the business background. Husted very much so from the political background. So having somebody that could potentially understand the ins and the outs could be important there. I also think it's really interesting. Moreno is the senior senator from Ohio, and he's only served for, what, a couple of weeks now?
Yeah.
So it is just interesting that Husted steps in with a far more expansive political background, but is the junior senator from Ohio, and the guy that is the senior senator has been in politics for a couple of weeks.
And another question I hope we get answered from DeWine is why wait? Why did he wait so long? This is a position he could have named. The Senate hearings are already ongoing for confirmation for Donald Trump's cabinet positions. This really feels like something that should have been named a week or so ago. Now, granted, last week was the official resignation by J.D. Vance for his seat. Obviously, that has to happen before you name. But why not name it the next day? And let's get this person to Washington. Let's get them going and hit the ground running. Instead, now they'll be starting, if it is John Husted, and we believe it will be, he's kind of behind the 8 ball. He's about 2 weeks late to the party.
Right, and to your point, it's an excellent point on that. DeWine could have actually done this in November. So as the law only stipulates that Vance needs to step down from the seat, and that could have been done almost immediately. And so that's a conversation, obviously, that needs to take place between Vance, DeWine, President Trump, all three potentially in on that. But this could have been done at any point. There was also nothing to say that DeWine couldn't name the successor before Vance's resignation. Nothing legally says that couldn't have happened. So to your point, Dan, this could have happened months ago. I mean, this really could have happened a long time ago. On the opposite end of that, it could have taken an additional amount of time because there doesn't necessarily need to be a full-on decision for quite some time. Obviously, for votes, it's very important. But as far as the legality goes, the state constitution of Ohio goes, there was nothing that told DeWine he needed to do it as soon as possible. Obviously, you want it done as soon as possible, but there was nothing that said it had to be done. So it is curious why now, and you're right, why not weeks ago when the new session was starting and you essentially could have had Husted or whoever it potentially could have been previously. Obviously, we know now it is Husted, but why couldn't they have just started then with the new crop of politicians that started for the 25 session?
Yeah, very interesting there. Hope that question gets asked as well. Now it appears, and depending on how long Lieutenant Governor Husted has known about this, he now needs to put together a team to go to Washington. Will he take basically his entirety of his corps in the Lieutenant Governor's office? Will he take them with him? Do you need new people to go with? Those are all questions that have to be asked. And who will now replace Lieutenant Governor John Husted? This could be very interesting. If you pull in somebody like Dave Yost to serve as the Lieutenant Governor for the next 2 years or a year left on his candidacy or of the governor's office, does that set up sort of who is going to be the heir apparent? Because we obviously all thought it was going to be Lieutenant Governor John Husted. Any last thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, I would just say for that lieutenant governorship, the names that we always consider and the names that I guess we should keep an eye out for on that, Matt Dolan and Jane Timken are the ones that at least come to front of mind that have been incredibly popular as far as names go for replacements of Republican positions in the state. So those would be names that we would potentially hear from and potentially key in on for that replacement. But yeah, Dan, dead on that. I guess that's now the immediate attention as to who replaces Husted.
Frank LaRose comes to mind, Secretary of State. We know he has eyes on the governor's office, so it's going to be a battle. This is politics. It's sort of like playing chess. When you move one up, who's going to slide in behind? So very interesting. We'll wait. In fact, we're going to have Professor Enton on with us, Jonathan Enton from Case Western Reserve University in their area of politics. He is just absolutely phenomenal. We'll start a little early, probably at about 12:50 before the 1 o'clock announcement, get his thoughts on information that's leaked out that it is going to be John Husted, and we'll go from there. So join us back on this conversation at about 12:50 before the governor's official announcement at 1 o'clock. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose along with Jeff Slauson. Have a great day.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps